Welcome in to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. This is a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition. I am your host, Benjamin Wolk. As always, here with Jordan Hill. We have a loaded episode this week. Tons of news. It's that time of year, Jordan. 3 new commitments. We'll get into all of those. We're going to be looking back at last week's official visit weekend, talking about who we're feeling good about when it comes to Georgia's chances. We're going to be previewing next weekend's or this upcoming weekend's official visits, and we're going to, like we did last week, try and tier those a little bit to contextualize for you who you should be thinking about and what senses coming into the weekend. We also have about 15 minutes of a one-on-one interview with Georgia wide receiver commit Ryan Mosley. Wanted to give him a little bit of chance to breathe after he announced his commitment a couple of weeks ago, but now he's got to, he wanted to connect with the people, and so gave you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the Carrollton wide receiver. As always, we'll have arrow pointing up, predict a commit, throwing in a new segment called Around the Country, because we are in a new time of year where Georgia's going to be having guys that were on their board that are going to be committing elsewhere, and we just sort of want to take a look at that. So it's going to be a loaded show. Jordan, I know my passion for college football recruiting can sometimes be a little overbearing, but are you feeling the June love at least?
Oh, I'm loving it. And also it's that time of year where if we're not talking about recruiting, are we talking about like the house settlement? Like, you giving me those two options, I'll talk recruiting all day. But no, it's fun to fire up another episode. And again, it's just been a busy week after busy week when it comes to Georgia recruiting. And the great thing is it gives us plenty to talk about on the show. Yeah,
and not changing anytime soon. All of these weeks, Kip and I were talking about this because we do our at Dog 24/7, we do our weekly, and I encourage you to check it out this week on Friday, like previewing who's coming in town and what is our take on these recruits coming into the weekend. Where do we think the recruitment is at? Where do we think they stand on Georgia's board? Those types of things. And we've had loaded Georgia recruiting weekends in the past, and they've been longer articles. But there were 18 last week at the time that we were doing it, and then a 19th got thrown on top of it. This week, I think we're already staring about 18, 16 to 18 in the face. And I think that you're going to see potentially more than that, because as we know, like, Georgia sometimes has some tricks up its sleeve on the recruiting front. And so busy time. And because of that, Georgia's going to be trying. We talked about this last week. There's a difference between recruiting guys and pushing for guys. And these are the weekends where you start pushing for guys. The guys that you really want, that are high on your board, that you don't want to see them go elsewhere on any other visits, you let them know that on these trips. And we've already seen that a little bit from this past weekend. There have been 3 commitments since our last episode. That's 2026 cornerback Justice Fitzpatrick, 2026 defensive lineman Carter Luckie, and 2027 wide receiver Gavin Honore. I'm going to start with the most recent, because earlier this week we talked a little bit already on the Junkyard Dawgcast, a little bit about Carter Luckie and about Gavin Honore, but there was some news even since then, and that's the Kirby Smart recruiting method right there. There's always something going down this time of year, and it was a big one. It was Justice Fitzpatrick, 4-star cornerback from St. Thomas Aquinas in South Florida, 6'1", 190-pound cornerback. I think he's number 8 cornerback in the 24/7 Sports rankings, number 87 overall prospect in the 24/7 Sports rankings. And I think that this is such a good ad that you could find people that'll tell you he's underrated, being ranked as the number 8 cornerback and the number 87 player in the country, which by no means is any kind of slouch on, the Andrew Ivins and Cooper Patagna recruiting boards. First and foremost, I guess I should say, a confident Team Wolk predicted commit choice a couple of weeks ago. But Jordan, just any initial thoughts, because of the magnitude of the name value of this recruitment, just any initial thoughts kind of on a whim, making, not on a whim, but, somewhat surprising timing, just, getting it done and locking this thing down in between or after Georgia's official visit weekend.
I thought that was a huge win for Georgia. And like you said, Ben, it's sort of funny thinking about Justice Fitzpatrick's recruitment, because, it seemed like Georgia had put itself in a good spot, but we were kind of expecting this to be a battle with Miami. And you made the point, I think it was a few Stay Wolks ago, where it's like, Kirby Smart and Mario Cristobal, 2 guys that recruited Justice's brother Minka Fitzpatrick to Alabama. And all of a sudden, these 2 were kind of squaring off, and that sort of set up for what we thought was going to be a long battle. And Justice is like, I've seen enough, and I like what I see at Georgia. And I wrote about this earlier this week, breaking down Justice Fitzpatrick's game. I really, really like his junior film. And this is, I always try to make the point that, look, I'm just watching their highlights. I'm not watching every single game, every single snap. But the way he plays the ball, his obvious football IQ with just reading and reacting and the plays he makes, watching his highlights, he doesn't strike me as the fastest guy on the field, but I love the way he plays corner. This is one of the guys, as I wrote about in my breakdown, of the guys that Georgia has gotten recently, this is the one that kind of made me go, wow, this guy has a real chance to be a big time corner for Georgia. So really love this addition for Georgia. And again, to get this thing done in June, like you said, you were surprised. So was I. I thought this would be a battle and a fight to the end. And obviously, just because he's committed doesn't mean schools like Miami aren't going to try to make him think twice. But I think that's a huge commitment for Georgia.
It's massive, massive, massive ad. And, look, I don't think, not to pat ourselves on the back, but anybody that was reading Dogs 24/7 over the last month, I think saw this trending the right way. And all of the vibes coming into the weekend felt this way. All the vibes coming out of the weekend felt this way. But even still, we can do the Matthew Stafford, Clayton Kershaw thing that's going to come up with Minkah Fitzpatrick every time. He's the younger brother of Minkah Fitzpatrick. This is a guy that comes from a professional football family and handles his recruitment that way. You haven't seen him make a ton of comments out there about anything having to do with his recruitment, whether that be during it or even since he's committed. This is a guy that likes to keep to himself, and his brother has been there, done that, and that's how, they're going to handle it. But I thought just because of, his brother's been through it, he would want to check everything out, see those official visits, do everything. And that's where this is a massive commitment because of the caliber of player that Justice Fitzpatrick is and because of the priority that he was at cornerback for Georgia this cycle. It's even more massive given the fact that he committed immediately following the official visit and totally locked things down. And so this is just huge, huge on multiple levels. Make no mistake about it. Kirby Smart's connection to the family was significant here. You brought it up. When Minkah Fitzpatrick committed to Alabama, it was Kirby Smart and it was Mario Cristobal. That's why I was always positioning it as Georgia versus Miami. Now that we really look at it, I don't know that it necessarily was going to be Georgia versus Miami. I think Texas was in there. I think Ohio State was in there, but I think this is one where Georgia just had this one. Kirby Smart recruited Minkah Fitzpatrick, had him on his side of the ball for a year, his first year when he was a freshman All-American. That stuff mattered. Minkah Fitzpatrick has been involved in this recruitment. He has come on visits with his brother at times throughout this process. And so, yeah, this is huge. But I'll also say this was a guy that Dante Williams keyed in on very early on in the year. And when you really look at it now, Zach Fort, Jordan Smith, Justice Fitzpatrick, when Dante Williams has pushed for guys this cycle, he's gotten them. And I think that there have been some commentary just around defensive back recruiting, period, not just him, over the last year. And this is a guy that's number 5 in the 24/7 sports recruiter rankings as we sit here right now. And I don't think that the work is done in terms of what he's doing in this class. And so quieting some doubters, don't think that he's done yet. I will say, as a player, Justice Fitzpatrick, kind of what you'd expect. Savvy, ready-made to play college football. Like I said, 6'1", 190, already physically built enough to walk into an SEC locker room right now. Could really play any spot in the secondary. I think cornerback will be his home when he starts out at Georgia. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think cornerback was what they expected Minkah Fitzpatrick to play when he got to Alabama. And sometimes you just fit in other places. So we'll see what that looks like. You mentioned if you were to look at his film, he doesn't look like the fastest, craziest long-range speed corner. That said, he has multiple sub-10, 100-meter dash times. So this is a dude that can definitely move, and he's posted it consistently. So I think that that's there. I'll say this. I thought this was a really cool commitment. Just the fact that it happened. He took one official visit. Because of his family, you would think that there would be more glitz and glamour, I guess, around this recruitment. But I guess that's how Minkah Fitzpatrick's always been too, right? They just kind of go about their business and that's it. And that's the kind of guy that Georgia wants.
Yeah, really again, I always am kind of cautious when we talk about guys whose like, brother played in the NFL or their dad did. But like, if I said this guy's name was John Smith and I watched his highlights, I'd come away really excited. Like, I think there's enough there that you can put aside, who his brother is and what his brother's done in college and the NFL. I think Georgia fans should allow themselves to be excited because I really like what Justice Fitzpatrick brings to the table.
All right. Perhaps the least surprising commitment news that you've ever seen was on Saturday, and that is Norcross defensive lineman Carter Luckie. I will say this, Jordan, have you ever covered brothers before? Like, have you ever covered a set of brothers at the same time?
It's a situation where I don't think I would count. Like, there's been guys like Jordan Hall and his brother Ali Hall is a walk-on. Like, I don't necessarily count that. So, off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody that's had, two brothers who had legit roles. You go back to high school. I don't know if I count that. There's plenty out there in East Alabama. There were plenty of brothers that were out there playing on the same field. But at the college level, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head.
I thought, not surprising, but I do think it's very cool. There's just a major legacy factor here. He's the younger brother of Georgia tight end Lawson Luckie. Their dad was a Georgia legacy as well. And so, again, like, I don't want to short sell this whole recruitment, but there was never a world that Carter Luckie was not going to be at Georgia. That's just the way that it is. Family ties were connecting him to Georgia. He's also 6'5", 290 pounds. And also he's 6'5", 290 pounds, and he's been limited a lot of this offseason because of labrum recovery. So this is a guy who I think is going to bulk into, 300, 310, be a versatile 3 technique for Georgia. Like I said on the Junkyard Dawgcast earlier this week, Georgia doesn't let guys with this frame on the defensive line get out of the state of Georgia, period. And they especially don't let it happen when they've already got his older brother on the team. And so I think that this was one of those where no matter what media types like myself tried to say throughout this recruitment, this one was always going to be Georgia. Was he maybe going to take visits other places, Florida State, Ohio State? Were they on the calendar? Sure. This one was never getting out of Athens on that official visit without already being a Georgia commit. When I talked to Carter, and I've talked with him a bunch really over the last year and a half. And again, I've said to him multiple times, like, I don't even know what to ask you at this point because we've talked so much, and I hate to say it, so obvious that you're going to end up in Georgia. It's like, what do we even do here it's, kind of a waiting game. But whenever you talk with him, it's always, you ask about the reasons why Georgia has always made sense and why it goes beyond just his brother being a tight end there. And he's a guy that gets it, right? Like, this is a guy, and it shouldn't surprise you when your brother's in the program, when your dad has experience in similar roles, like, you have a better understanding of things at an earlier age, probably. But he's been around the program. He's the type of guy, he brings up development. He talks about not being a finished product. He talks about Trey Scott and what he's been able to do with guys of his body type and skill set, and how he embraces the process of knowing you're not stepping into Georgia as a true freshman, as an unrefined prospect and playing day one. But if you stick it out and listen to Trey Scott and, just kind of stick to the program, there's a good chance that you're going to end up as an NFL draft pick one day. And so this is a guy that preaches all of those types of things, which again, shouldn't really surprise you. But either way, I mean, you talk about Justice Fitzpatrick, we talk about Jordan Smith, Ryan Mosley, like, these are all no nonsense guys, really. And I think that's why Graham Houston's another one. I think that's why you see, these commitments that have happened since May. Georgia really wanted them. Georgia pushed for them. And you realize, like, they're willing to shut it down because they're the type of guys that just don't care about the recruiting bogus. They know they want to be at Georgia, and it's as simple as that for them.
Yeah, Carter's a guy I'm excited to follow the next few years at Georgia. And I'm just always interested in the younger brother because, coming up, I mean, I don't know if you had this experience like in school, Ben, but if you had older siblings, or like for me, I had older cousins, and I was like, oh, you're so-and-so. Like, you kind of come with expectations. And especially I'd have to think about, as an athlete, that they're like, oh, you're Lawson's little brother. And that comes with an expectation. So I do think that can be motivating, especially if they get in a situation where they're back on the same team again. I really like that just for Carter's development and to go out there. And, I'm sure that Kirby will be on the mic at some point after Carter, probably bringing up Lawson when he's talking to Carter. But I do think that can be really beneficial. I think that can help motivate him. And you guys on the Junkyard Dawgcast, I think it might have been Kip, compared him to TID. And I kind of see that in watching his film. I think he's a capable pass rusher, but I was really impressed with how he played the run and his ability to get out in pursuit and make plays, even if the play is not right there at him. And two, just getting off blocks and stuff in the run. I really like this addition. He's a guy that's going to come to Georgia with a lot to prove because people know his last name and people know of his brother. But I think he's fully capable of getting to Georgia, developing, and eventually becoming a factor for them.
I said this earlier this week as well, but his best football is in front of him. And I think that that's something that really Georgia coaches have kind of fallen in love with. I think they realize the frame's there, the build's there. He even has some really good film up to this point, but I think that they think he's only scratching the surface of what he's going to be able to become. Last but not least, in the 2027 recruiting class, it is modern day wide receiver Gavin Honore. If you look back at this last week, this one was pretty calculated. Honor schedules a visit to come camp at Georgia and spend multiple days in Athens. One of our West Coast guys, Blair Angulo, puts in a Georgia crystal ball before the weekend, kind of out of the blue, one of those where even I, in the Georgia world, was like, whoa, what's going on here? I need to connect with Blair and figure out what the heck's going on. I'll say this, a lot of times I tease Dogs 24/7 as reasons why you should subscribe to 24/7 Sports. Nobody does West Coast better in the business than Blair Angulo, Greg Biggins, and Brandon Huffman. They are the best of the best. Georgia obviously recruits nationally, and whenever Georgia's involved with West Coast guys, I promise you Dogs 24/7 will have it first, and it has nothing to do with either of the two guys that you're looking at right here. Our West Coast guys are plugged in over there. That happened in this case. Honor comes in on the visit, camps, excels at the camp, flies back to California, commits to Georgia the second that he lands back in California. So I think this is a situation where both sides knew what this visit was and it played out accordingly. Now, I'll admit I don't know a ton about this guy as a player. This was relatively fresh to me as well, but Georgia worked him out and they liked what they saw. And I think that anybody who knows how Georgia operates should know that that means something. He's 5'10", 175-pound slot type, so not as big of a frame, but the dude can scoot. If Georgia wants guys with this skill set, and I'll say this, if you have this skill set early, if you're all the way across the country and you want to commit to Georgia, James Coley is not going to say no to you because Georgia would love to be able to expand the footprint of who they're bringing in at wide receiver. I will say this is a cool little tidbit, I'll say. USC 2026 linebacker commit Sean Scott. I got to know him a little bit out at the Navy All-American Bowl in January. And when Gavin committed, he actually reached out to me and was like, I just want you to know Georgia got a dude for sure. And I was like, that's interesting. I don't know a whole lot about him. And he went on to say, he was like, this is a guy that would be 1,000-yard receiver for us at Modern Day if we didn't have 3 other 5-star receivers. It's a loaded receiver group at Modern Day. They've got Chris Henry Jr., a lot of other really talented guys. But this is someone that it was telling to me that someone that's committed to USC felt the need to reach out and say, hey, this is a teammate of mine that just committed to Georgia that is legit. And he felt the need to say that. So that was something I wanted to bring up because I found that very interesting. A lot left to play out. I know what people are going to say. It's 2027. There's so much to go. West Coast, we're still trying to figure out what's going to happen with Vance Spafford's recruitment in the 2026 class. So I've heard a lot of comparisons to that. What I'll say is this guy, Georgia intentionally brought in for a camp visit to make sure that their eval on him was what they thought it was, and they felt that way, and he committed immediately. So there's clearly some mutual understanding there. But James Coley changed the game. That's what he said he's going to do, and that's what he is clearly doing. So I've said all that. I've said we don't need to make a big deal about whether he signs, but Jordan, I'll put you on the spot. Does he sign with Georgia?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Seeing, they've done a good job recruiting out in California and recruiting Modern Day, and I think that's one of those, if you can get that commitment, you take it, like you said, 5'10", 175. I saw where Greg Biggins said he had a 100-meter dash at 10.86. I mean, there's a lot to like with this guy. I'll have a story breaking down his film on Thursday and looking closer at his game. And yeah, I know that you don't want to get too excited about a 2027 kid, but going out to modern day, getting a guy with that much talent and then sharing the anecdote you did, I mean, clearly his teammates think very highly of him. And I think, you kind of have to be cautious, but you have to like that addition for the 2027 class, the first commitment in that 2027 class for Georgia.
Absolutely. All right. Great news. We will, every episode we do of these every week throughout June and probably into July, we're probably going to be very heavy on the front end of the show talking about news, because that's just what's happening this time of year, and it's not stopping anytime soon. Non-commitments aside, or non-commitments, let's talk about the last official visit weekend, just sort of review it. I know last week we previewed it and talked a lot in depth about what you should expect. I think a lot of the info that's come out of the weekend aligned with what was going into the weekend, save for maybe a few things here or there. But instead, I'm not going to go through all 19 official visitors, because we've got a preview next weekend. We got to talk to Ryan Mosley. There's too much to get into. We can't talk about all 19 of them. But what I wanted to do is kind of go through who we're feeling good about when it comes to Georgia's chances in these recruitments. If you subscribe to Dogs 24/7, I did have a Stay Wolk article coming out of the weekend where I touched on some of these guys in a Georgia trending well section of the notebook. And so this won't be a news flash for some of you that have already read that notebook. But a couple names. Justice Fitzpatrick obviously was one that I had on my list, which we now know is official. Desmond Green, interior offensive lineman from Timberland, South Carolina. Going to take visits still, so we'll see. Georgia's recruiting interior offensive line really, really, really well. This cycle, I'll say Georgia has had to let some folks know that they don't have a spot at Georgia on the interior offensive line because of how well Georgia is recruiting interior offensive linemen right now. I guess I'll throw into that conversation Zyke Helton from Carrollton, Georgia, someone that I think trending well. Let's see. He might still take visits to Bama. Kamari Brooks, I think Georgia's trending well, in a good spot. Local product. He's taking that official visit to Georgia this weekend. And Georgia's only got one other outside linebacker coming on a visit this weekend. I think Chidera Uzo-Duribe's focus will be as much on Tuscaloosa this weekend as it will be on his one recruit that he has in Athens, because Georgia's got to find a way to lock in Kamari Brooks coming out of that Alabama visit. And I still think that they're going to, but maybe a sleepless night or two the upcoming for Chidera Uzo-Duribe on that front. Tight end, Caden Prothro becomes even more important now that Mark Bowman is committed to USC. So I think Georgia is well positioned for Caden Prothro. Another one, though, Texas, Florida, Auburn, they're going to get visits, and you're never going to sleep completely easy until you've got them in when you've got names like that on the schedule. But again, a guy that I'm feeling really good about. Craig Dandridge, wide receiver from Cambridge, someone that I've been saying for a while I feel like will end up in Georgia's class. I still feel that way, but another example of someone that until the visits are done, we can't say for certain that it's locked in, but I do like Georgia's chances. And I'll say this, a name that this sort of differs from some of the information that I was getting coming into and coming out of the weekend. So it's notable, I would say. Notre Dame linebacker commit Thomas Davis Jr. I'm still in wait and see mode on what's going to happen here, but it's getting interesting. And I'll just say that. I think it's getting interesting. It was a little bit of a surprise that he came on the official visit. Notre Dame wasn't caught off guard by it, but the way that the news sort of came out somewhat surprisingly, and it felt like Georgia was kind of trying to keep things quiet, and they didn't necessarily want people to know that they were doing it. Like, it's something that I'm keeping an eye on. And because his dad is who his dad is, even though he might love Notre Dame and love Notre Dame coaches and respect that they recruited him earlier, Georgia's the one team that I think is going to make him think about some things. And he came out and publicly said, like, I am locked in with Notre Dame a couple of weeks ago when they came on a visit to his school. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I think that if something happens in the next 2 weeks or so, I wouldn't be shocked. If it doesn't, that's when I'd start to think that Notre Dame should start feeling pretty good again about holding on to him. A couple other names that are just worth mentioning. I mean, James Johnson from South Florida, is a we'll see situation. Chris Booker committed to Alabama. I like where Georgia's at, but we'll see. I'm kind of in a wait and see mode on Peyton Dyer, cornerback out of Duluth, and then defensive lineman Tico Crittenden from Lithonia. Busy boards is how I would describe it on the defensive line and at cornerback. So, you got 60 plus guys coming in on official visits. You're going to have 27 to 30 guys probably in the class. Room at the end situation. Sometimes you got to figure things out throughout the month. And then to a lesser extent, I will bring up Cedarian Morgan. I am consider me the utmost skeptical when it comes to this guy getting away from Alabama or even potentially Auburn, but I could be proven wrong. I understand the buzz. I've heard the buzz as well. I understand that there is some belief that, Georgia is doing a better job there than people think. It has been mentioned elsewhere, and I'll mention it here, that he is going to play wide receiver with Jared Curtis's 7-on-7 team later this summer, and those two are close and communicating on a daily basis. And so we'll see. I don't see it, but we'll see. Out of that list, Jordan, was there anything that you felt that I did not include or that you're surprised that I shared?
No, I think you hit on most of them. I mean, the situation with Morgan is probably the most interesting to me because of Jared Curtis. And I kind of go back, and we talked about this when Jared Curtis committed to Georgia. When they had Dylan Raiola, when he committed, it was sort of like, okay, who's going to kind of follow in suit? Who's going to follow him? Maybe Ryan Wingo. I remember him being a popular receiver that year. And it never really came to pass. And then you kind of can't help but second guess once Dylan Raiola reopens his recruitment and winds up going to Nebraska. Like, was there something to that? But to see if maybe Jared Curtis can get in his ear about coming to Georgia, I feel like when you look at Georgia on the whole, if you were going to knock them for a position they've struggled to recruit top guys, it's probably wide receiver at this point. And, to go after him and maybe have a shot is really interesting to me. Like you said, you look at the top guys in the state of Alabama, trying to get them past Alabama and Auburn is just such a tall task. But that one's interesting to me. And then, Kamari Brooks, just kind of following what happens there. As much as we like to, really push our content at Dogs 24/7. If I'm Georgia, I'm following our buddy Brett Greenberg this weekend and seeing what he's hearing out of Brooks as he's, considering Alabama and seeing what he can find out there. So, like you hit on, seems like several key recruitments trending in the right direction, but we know that, these kids take other visits and you have a lot to consider. And again, it's what makes doing this show and checking in on a weekly basis totally worth it, because there's all kinds of developments pretty much on a daily basis.
For sure. And there, more developments to come. And, that's just from this past weekend. And it's crazy when we're talking 18, 19, 20 official visitors in a weekend. I think Kip told me that Texas has an official visit weekend this summer that has like 28 guys on the current committed or the current visitors list. So it's a different world now that there are uncapped. You used to have a restriction on the number of official visits that you could host, and there were restrictions on the number of official visits that players could take. Now that that's out the window, it has definitely changed the look of these weekends. And they were already getting busy over the last 2 years, but this cycle, it's just different. Let's preview the upcoming official visitor weekend. And this is another one where, we're looking at close to 20 guys that are going to be on campus. Stay locked in over at Dogs 24/7 for any updates that we have. Once again, I've broken them down into tiers just in terms of how you should think about these recruitments coming into the weekend. And the first one that I'm going to start with is pretty simple, the commits category. Georgia's got 4 commits coming in this weekend. Brady Marchese, wide receiver from Cartersville. Graham Houston, offensive lineman from Buford, who earlier in an article today, as we're doing this, I wrote an article about all of Georgia's commits. And in the intro, I was listing out all the guys that had committed in the last 6 or in the last 5 weeks, basically, and that we weren't going to get too deep into the details with them because it was so fresh. There wasn't a whole lot new. And instead of saying interior offensive lineman Graham Houston, I wrote interior offensive lineman Tate Ratledge, which should tell you how I feel about Graham Houston and the type of player that he's going to be, because that's exactly what happened in my brain as I was meaning to write out Graham Houston and wrote out Tate Ratledge. But defensive lineman, Seven Cloud out of junior college, and then Keelan Jones, safety from Sprayberry High School. Not a whole lot to add on these. I did have an article earlier this week at Dog 24/7, stick or flip. You can go check that out and just sort of get a sense of where you feel like each of these guys are. But I don't think there's going to be any significant news coming out of the weekend. I'll say Brady Marchese and Keelan Jones are likely to take official visits to Florida and, in Brady's case, South Carolina later in the month. So it's something we'll keep an eye on. But I don't think that anything newsworthy or notable is really going to be known or come out of this weekend when it comes to any of those players. In Seven Cloud's case, nice to get him back for the second weekend in a row. He was on an unofficial visit last weekend and then was back on an official visit this upcoming weekend. So I know there have been some jitters from folks ever since he hired Drew Rosenhaus, but I think that those have been tempered for now. The next category, which is a relevant one, especially with this episode talking about Justice Fitzpatrick and Carter Luckie, is the family ties category. You've got Ekene Agboko, offensive lineman from South Garner in North Carolina, and PJ Dean from, I believe, West Forsyth High School in North Carolina. Ekene Agboko is the younger brother of Georgia defensive lineman Nnamdi Agboko, and PJ Dean is the younger half-brother of former Georgia offensive lineman Jared Wilson. Did I just say PJ Dean's an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman?
I think you said defensive lineman. If not, that we can make sure that the folks know he's looking to be a defensive lineman.
Yeah. The people need the raw, uncut Ben mistakes out there. To be fair, it's a situation where he was an interior offensive lineman, has transitioned to defensive line this year. I do think these are situations where, depending on how persistent Georgia gets this weekend, I could see either of them in Georgia's class. I probably favor the situation with Ekene Agboko right now for a few reasons. One, the buzz has been there more with him throughout the spring because of what's happened with Jackson Cantwell. I know he's listed as an interior offensive lineman. I think Ekene Agboko is someone that Georgia looks at as an offensive tackle frame, and Georgia needs to figure out its offensive tackle situation. I've mentioned already, interior offensive line is set when it comes to Georgia. Like, it is going to be a good interior line class for Georgia. What happens at tackle, we'll see. Ekene Agboko would be a great option to try and be able to lock him down. PJ Dean, still up in the air. I think that Ohio State has made things interesting. And I'll say this, I think Clemson has made things interesting with Ekene Agboko too. So I don't think that just because there are family ties here that Georgia is guaranteed to get either necessarily. But given how we know, look, Georgia just got 2 2026 commitments, and I think they leaned heavily on personal family relationships to be able to lock both of Justice and Carter down in the last week. I think it's a little bit easier to get people to just say, hey, I want to shut this thing down and I'm ready to stick with Georgia, when there are some family relationships to be able to lean on. This one is probably the most interesting category when it comes to recruitments that I think you should be paying attention to what you hear going in and what you hear coming out. And that's the don't sleep on this recruitment category. One, I don't think anyone's sleeping on it really, but I think that they might be sleeping on it a little in terms of where Georgia fits into the picture here, and that's running back Savion Hyder. Not saying I think that he's favored to end up at Georgia, but I think that Georgia has been said to be running fourth for Hyder behind Ohio State, Michigan, and Tennessee pretty much everywhere that you look. Hyder hasn't spoken a whole lot on his recruitment. Like, this is a guy that is pretty quiet, generally speaking, and I think that he is trying to get through all of these visits without, putting too much out there on where he's feeling. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is a guy that is high on Georgia's board. If you're talking all positions, you're talking running back, you're talking offensive side of the ball, this dude's going to be near the top. And let's just see what we hear coming out of it. It's one that you definitely, if there starts to be Georgia buzz coming out of the weekend, I would say, whoa, let's tune in and start paying attention to this one very heavily. Tyren Wortham is a UCF wide receiver commit from Booker High School in Sarasota, Florida, high school teammates with Chauncey Kennan. They will both be on visits this weekend, I should say. But Ty Wortham, not talking about him enough. This guy, Georgia loves this guy. A lot of programs love this guy. you see UCF commit, and I think that a lot of people sort of downplay it. It's like, oh, this guy's committed to UCF. How good could he be? Sometimes these smaller programs have to be a little bit more detail-oriented when it comes to identifying top talent early, and I think sometimes you see it play out this way. Do not sleep on Tyron Wortham. Big time player. The same I'll say for Chase Calicut, North Shore, and Houston. He's listed as a safety at 24/7 Sports. He's told me that he's getting recruited as a cornerback everywhere, and my understanding is Georgia's recruiting him as a cornerback as well. I told you to start peeling your eyes open for Justice Fitzpatrick a few weeks ago. Start peeling your eyes open for Chase Calicut is what I'm going to say here. Georgia likes this guy a lot. 6'3" cornerback. We've seen Georgia in the past. Daniel Harris's of the world. They love a good frame. They love having cornerbacks that fit slightly different physiques. Justice Fitzpatrick's a little bit different. I think that they would love to add Chase Calicut here as well. I'll add 3 names where I'm not 100% sure where things are at with them, but don't sleep on them just because I think that things could get more interesting than people think. Braden Fogel, tight end, just by nature of what happened with Mark Bowman, I could see Georgia pushing for Braden Fogel a little bit more. Tamarian Watkins and I'll also say Kenneth Goodwin are both linebackers. And Tamarian Watkins is listed as a safety a lot of places. Georgia is recruiting him as a linebacker. I cannot speak to what other position groups he's getting recruited at, but I think most people are recruiting him as a linebacker. South Carolina, Miami, Florida, they're all involved. Let's see what happens with Tamarian Watkins. He has been in Georgia mock classes for me in the past, not with a huge confidence level, but been trying to figure out the linebacker board beyond Tyler Atkinson, and it's been a little bit difficult. And I think Thomas Davis Jr. created a little bit of clarity there, which maybe would have me change some things. But out of that don't sleep on those recruitments category, Jordan, who are you sleeping on the most?
Who I'm sleeping on, I would never sleep on any of those guys because Ben has I've seen the light because of Ben. Savion Hyder's the guy I'm probably most intrigued by because as much as, some of our first predicted commits were running back. I think I had Derek Cooper when we first started that segment, and we're still waiting for Georgia to get a running back commit in the 2026 cycle. So, Savion Hyder seems to be that top guy, but he's that top guy for teams like Ohio State, Michigan, and Tennessee, like you mentioned. So to see there, and then, I can't believe you talked about Ty Wortham and did not mention that he made your predicted commit team. That's a guy that makes a lot of sense to me, his skill set and what he could add to this class and, what he stands, sort of the skill set he would bring among the receivers Georgia's going after in 2026. So it's kind of a cop-out to talk about all those guys. But when you talk about, the linebacker who, if you tell me Georgia's looking at a guy that was projected as a safety and they want him to play linebacker, I feel like we see that mold again and again and again at Georgia. That one really fascinates me because just like running back, we really don't know where Georgia's going to wind up when it comes to linebacker in 2026.
Oh, I didn't bring it up, Jordan, because the job's not finished yet. Georgia's still got to close Tyron Wortham down. But, I like that flip a commit prediction at this point in time. I'll say that. A category that I had last week that I will run back this week and probably for weeks to come because it is sort of an all-encompassing one that's a cop-out for me to be able to include a bunch of different guys inside of it, and that is the most competitive category. These are the recruitments where Georgia's in it. I'm trying to, James Johnson was an example of someone last weekend where he was in that most competitive category, but I could absolutely see him in Georgia's class. I think Caden Prothro might have even been in the most competitive category, and I will – I now this week have him as someone that I think Georgia should really be feeling good about. So by no means can someone not emerge from this most competitive category. It's just things are competitive right now. Georgia probably shouldn't be viewed as the clear-cut leader, and there's going to be other visits that get taken that I think could make it hard for Georgia to be able to land them. So defensive lineman Vodney Cleveland, I believe from Parker in Birmingham, Alabama. Kendall Guerville, I think is from North Mecklenburg maybe, and I'm blanking on my North Carolina high school knowledge for a second, but this is an interior defensive lineman that we probably haven't talked enough about at Dogs 24/7. I think he was in my first mock class, and then there just hasn't been a lot out there with him since, and so I've been kind of wait and see with him, but that is a big visit that's coming up this weekend when it comes to Georgia sorting out its defensive line. Dre Quinn is an outside linebacker was at Greater Atlanta Christian. It will now be at Buford for his senior season. That was just announced yesterday. I think Clemson did a great job last weekend, but Clemson didn't necessarily lock him down. With Clemson, a lot of times when they go on that first weekend official visit, they get a lot of guys that commit. I'll say this: there's a guy that's an interior offensive line target that's supposed to be officially visiting Georgia later in the summer that is not going to make it to Georgia's official visit because Clemson did such a good job this last weekend. And so that happens from time to time. And when you don't commit, I think it makes people feel like you still got a chance and say that Clemson didn't totally lock it down. So we'll see what happens with Drake Quinn. We've talked a bunch about Georgia maybe only taking one. So it's an interesting weekend because you got Kamari Brooks in Tuscaloosa that Georgia really, really wants. You've got Drake Quinn coming in that if Georgia doesn't get Kamari Brooks, they really, really want Drake Quinn, and they might want him anyways, even alongside Kamari Brooks. So let's see. 5-star cornerback Chauncey Kennan is someone that is high school teammates with Tyron Wortham. I think this is a super competitive recruitment. He's a 5-star cornerback. Naturally, that's going to be a super competitive recruitment. So let's see. I'm not feeling as good about that one as I would have at certain points earlier in the year. And then this is sort of a cop-out throwing this one in here, but Vanderbilt cornerback commit Caden Harris. I'm putting him here just because he's committed somewhere else. He's the only, to our knowledge so far. Well, I guess Tyron Wortham is also committed somewhere else, but Caden Wortham is the only one that's committed to another SEC program or another Power 5 program. So, I think Georgia, I favor other cornerbacks landing in Georgia's class at this time. Out of that most competitive category, Jordan, who do you think Georgia should want the most?
Ooh, who they should want the most? I think you have to go with Chauncey Kennan. I mean, you talk about the idea of pairing him with Justice Fitzpatrick. And it's funny because this got brought up on the Junkyard earlier this week where I think it was when Justice committed and someone was like, man, I'm glad we're doing so good on cornerback in 26 because they felt like 25 was a letdown. And I think Ben and I had the same feeling of like, no, we actually like what Georgia added at corner in that 2025 cycle. So, I think cornerback has been a strength of so many of these classes the last few years. And Georgia just repeatedly, one, recruits guys who wind up developing well, but recruit the position well enough where you get a situation like going into this season where I just really like Georgia's depth at cornerback. So that would be the guy if you wanted me to like put a pin in like who should be the top priority among those guys. If you get Chauncey Kennan and add that to what I think is a really strong secondary in this 2026 cycle, you should be really excited if you're a Georgia fan.
I don't disagree. I always look at the defensive linemen like Rodney Cleveland and Kendall Guerrero. Like Georgia kind of operates in silence when it comes to defensive line recruiting. Like a lot of times guys come out of the woodwork as someone that Georgia really liked on the defensive line. You didn't necessarily realize how much they really liked them. Those are two. Rodney Cleveland, always hard to get guys out of Alabama, but I think Georgia's in there. And then Kendall Guerrero as well. Georgia has a track record in North Carolina defensive line recruiting too. Am I right in that is he at North Carolina? Or is he in South Florida?
Fort Myers, Florida.
Okay, yeah. All right, not in North Carolina. I think he was at. Where's he at now? North Fort Myers or?
What I'm seeing on his 24/7 sports profile is Fort Myers.
Fort Myers. Okay, I think it was James Johnson was at North Fort Myers and then transferred to Northwestern. Glad we could get that corrected because I know somebody out there is in their car screaming at us right now saying he's not from North Carolina. Why do you keep saying that? So I'm glad we could get the record corrected before we moved on to the final category, which is I'm going to call it the O-line evals category because it's two guys that weren't really on our radar at the beginning of spring, and Georgia went out to see him. A couple other programs have gone out to see him. That is Hebron Christian offensive lineman Fletcher Turk and North Gwinnett offensive lineman Zachary Lewis. I don't even have answers for you yet in terms of what I expect to happen here because I think these are the type of recruitments that fascinate me in that if Georgia's going out and evaluating you during spring and giving you an offer and bringing you on an official visit, they saw something that made them feel the need to change the way that they were recruiting you. And Georgia still has power and pull in these recruitments. they're not the first ones in. They don't have the inside track to be able to get either of these guys, but do they have the name value, brand value, power to say, yeah, but we really, really want you in this class and we want you to change your mind? And that happens. I can't entirely rule that out either. All right. Big official visit weekend coming up. So definitely stay locked in. I'd also say this. We just brought up a lot of names. We did this whole thing last week and didn't have Thomas Davis Jr.'s name on there until Friday. So stay locked into Dogs 24/7 because there is a realistic possibility that there are more people to bring up when it comes to Georgia football recruiting this upcoming weekend. All right, let's get into the interview with Ryan Mosley. We went about 15 minutes or so with him. You know, this has been a long time coming for Ryan Mosley. So we get into a bunch of things on when he really knew, how he let the people know, what Georgia fans should be expecting from him. We're going to jump to a quick ad break. Before we do that, I do want to call out Jordan. Hit him with the promo real quick.
Yes, 60% off. This is a good opportunity to come on board Dogs 24/7. And, you know, I mean, doing this show every week, I think you get a good sense of what's going on in recruiting. But like Ben said, these things change. There are people added last minute. But if you subscribe to Dogs 24/7, you are up to speed on all that. And you get all the intel. You sign up now, you'll be set for the football season and men's basketball season after that. And most of baseball season with Olivia Sayre covering baseball for us. So can't encourage that enough. 60% off. That sale will only last for about another week. So highly encourage you guys to get on board. Because if you're watching this show, you care about Georgia recruiting. And I'm super proud of the work that the entire team at Dogs 24/7 is doing. And I think if you sign up, if you hang around, especially in these next few weeks, you will see that it's very much worth the deal.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump into quick ad, then jump into Ryan Mosley. And then when we come back, we'll have our segments that I know everybody's waiting on as well. Welcome into the show, a very, very special guest. It is 6'3", 195-pound wide receiver maybe wide receiver. Maybe we'll get into all that. From Carrollton, Georgia, as a junior, 55 catches, 850 yards, 12 touchdowns. I know I got to see one firsthand in the state championship game as well. It is Georgia's most recent commitment on the offensive side of the ball in the 2026 class, Mr. Ryan Mosley. Thank you for joining the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. I'm great to be on this show, talk to the people.
Awesome. Well, I know there's plenty that I want to get into, but we got to start with the news of the last couple of weeks. You finally committed, or I guess I should say you finally publicly committed to all the fine folks at home. It's been a long time coming. So let's get into the backstory of how that all happened. And I'll start with an easy one. What was the number one reason why you would say you're a Georgia Bulldog?
The number one reason, just the way they, put people in the league, the NFL, like they put people in the NFL, they prepare you for the next level. Like everybody at Georgia, they're make you better, practice hard, so Coach Kirby do a great job, doing that.
Now, I know you committed on, I guess it was May 28th was the official date that you let the world know. For the people that are in the weeds on recruiting, they know silent commitments exist. And no matter how many times you told me you weren't one, you were a silent commitment to Georgia. So how long ago did you really know? And I guess when did you let Georgia coaches know that?
So in April, I think after my spring break, so it might have been like the third week of April, I went there, so I ain't tell nobody I was going there. I went there on a little scrimmage, so that's when I, silent did it. So I just want to kept that silence till I did my OV. So
yeah. Now you did that or you just kind of let the coaches know in April. Did you know going on that visit in April, like, hey, I'm going to be letting coaches know today?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So when did you know? When did you have that moment of clarity where you were like, all right, I'm going to end up at Georgia when it's all said and done?
Just when I went up there for the junior day, just just the love that all the coaches give me. It just felt like home when went up there. Every time I go up to Georgia, I get all type of love from the coaches, the fans. So I really love that. So
all right, so I'm always curious about this. Like when you're a silent, haven't gone public with it yet. You've let coaches know that you're coming to Georgia. I'm sure they're like, all right, we want you to go public with it. Like, how do those conversations go where they're like, they're not trying to coerce you necessarily, but it definitely makes them feel better when they know, hey, he's told the world.
Yeah. So, when I went up there for my OV, that was like, it's time to post it. So I already got in mind I was going to post it probably like the next week or this week. So when I went up there, I was like, yeah, I'm going to post it next week. So, they got happy, post it, went viral. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know I want to ask about that OV weekend just because I know that was kind of, even though you were silently committed to them and you kind of always knew it was going to be them, like that was the moment where it really locked it down for good. And
yes, sir.
I'll start here. Like for the listeners who don't know, and I'm hoping they do because we talked about it like a couple episodes ago about the scavenger hunt at length, but what goes down scavenger hunt weekend? Like I know it's a little bit different than a lot of the other recruiting events you've been on.
Scavenger hunt, oh my God, that's so fun. It's just you go around the whole campus looking for some pictures. You gotta do stuff. You gotta like dance. One time we had to hop in a little water fountain they got in the middle of campus. So so I mean like that's the most funnest thing they ever did. Like scavenger hunt, can't nobody beat that.
Had you ever done one before, or was that your first one?
That was my first one. That was my first one. Yes, sir.
Cool. So it's pretty obvious. We talked about this a little bit before we went live on this. Like it's pretty obvious Georgia wide receiver recruiting since James Coley came back as wide receivers coach is just different than it was. And, he says change the game and he lives by it. Like you've seen 2025 class was great. 2026 class is already building. Just got a 2027 yesterday too. Yeah. Like James Coley is bringing the best of the best to play wide receiver. What's the magic of James Coley that has wide receivers want to come play for him?
Just his ability to coach and his coaching style and his off coaching style. Like it's two different persons. Like when he's on that field, he's crazy. He's gonna get on you. When he's off the field, he's still crazy, but he's so cool. Like you won't know he act like that until you get on the field. So
that's so funny. So I know I just mentioned it there. Change the game. How many times has he said change the game to you over the last 2 years?
I don't even know, but it's a lot of time.
When he says that, like, what does that mean to you about change the game? Like, how do you interpret that?
Just coming in, changing the game. Make plays, big time catches. Score obviously. So yeah.
I mean, I've seen you play a bunch, so I've probably on this show talked about your game plenty of times, but I'd love to hear it straight from the source. Like when you describe your game as a wide receiver. Like, what are you bringing to Georgia's receiver room?
I'm big, strong, route runner, head top, get open type of receiver, always got to get open. Just being the dynamic receiver on the field, the receiver, the QB can trust, one-on-one situation. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like to say, though, don't sleep on you after the catch. Everyone, like, the contested catch stuff is great.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I saw that touchdown in the state championship game. Like, you got to, if you're sleeping on Ryan Mosley after the catch, you're going to have a long day.
Oh, yeah, I got that extra gear. I kick in. Yes, sir.
That's right. All right. So, I got to ask, and we've talked about this bunch, so it's going to be repetitive a little bit, but you've talked with Coley about wide receiver. You've talked with Travaris Robinson about safety. Like, what should people expect that split to look like in college, if at all?
So priority receiver, third downs, I'll be at safety.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I mean, when you were on your OVs or just any other meetings, like I even saw when you were doing your photo shoot, you had both Coley and T-Rob in the photos. Like, how much emphasis were they putting on the defensive side of the ball just throughout your recruitment in general?
Oh, I mean, like a lot.
Really?
They want me to come play safety, receiver. It don't matter. So it don't matter what I play. Just as long as I'm helping the team, I'll be good.
All right, cool. This part fascinates me, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit as well. Like you weren't sure whether you were going to commit this week or you were going to commit like last week, what that was going to look like, because you did have official visits to Alabama, South Carolina, Texas A&M, Nebraska. What ultimately made you feel comfortable enough in Georgia to say, you know what, I don't even need to take those visits. I'm ready to lock this thing down?
Just, having that connection with Coach Kirby, having just a good connection with the head coach, the head man of everything, then Coach Cooley, Coach T Rob, everybody. So just having that connection, when I went on the OV, it felt like, this is where I need to be. I don't need to take no more OVs. This is where I want to be. So that will make me make my decision.
Now, you've been probably to as many Georgia football practices as anybody that's not actually already on the team. So,
Yeah.
Nobody on the mic is safe when Kirby Smart's on the mic. Have you ever been victim of Kirby Smart already?
Oh, no. I ain't big victim. No.
So you've been safe. You've done everything you need to do out there. He hasn't gotten after you yet.
Oh, no, sir.
All right, that's good. You never know. I mean, hey, my Dogs 24/7 coworker Jordan Hill, Kirby got after him last fall because he was writing on his notepad, not watching something that was happening at practice, and Kirby's like, hey, pay attention to my players. Pay attention to my players. So nobody is safe. Truly, nobody is safe out there. Out of all I think I have a guess, but out of all the coaches that were recruiting you, who was the hardest one to call and let them know that you were going to be at Georgia?
Coach Cooley.
No. Of all the people that you didn't choose, who was the hardest one to let them know? Like,
the hardest one was I had to go with South Carolina.
Coach Furry.
Definitely, Coach Furry. So
yeah, I had a feeling about that. I mean, I want to go. I guess on that note, like I want to go back way back. I guess last summer we were talking about your recruitment, and you said you were kind of wanting to make a decision in October of last year. Like you were getting to the point of being ready. Shoot me straight. Was it going to be Georgia then, or was it someone else at that time?
It was someone else at that time. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Was it South Carolina?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay.
I assumed as much. What was South Carolina doing so well, even though you didn't end up choosing them? Like, obviously, they did a great job recruiting you. What did they do so well to recruit you? And then what did Georgia manage to do to be able to change that?
Just South Carolina, they recruit very hard, texting Coach Furry, texting Coach Beamer, calling just every time. I loved them, but had to go with Georgia because love Georgia. So Georgia, they did one step further, So yeah.
No doubt. I mean, I say this to people all the time. These are impossible decisions to make, especially with the relationships that you build and things like that. So I know it's tough. I wanted to ask you about this. So you're on Cam Newton's 7-on-7 team. Which I always think is fascinating. I imagine you probably grew up and Cam Newton was like a legend, like larger than life figure. How'd you get involved with his 7-on-7 team? And like, what was that like kind of meeting him and just getting involved with his team?
Meeting him, he's just like a father figure. He's a coach and he's like a father to us, off the field. He's going to coach you well, he's going to get him, Cam, he like to talk garbage about you, so, but he loves you at the same time, but, he going to make you push you to your limits. So, that's the thing I love about Cam. So, yeah.
Now, he likes to chirp, but I got to say, I mean, I was out at the Sevens tournament when y'all were playing Raw Miami, and the other coaches and players love to chirp at Cam. As a player on Cam's team, and I've seen it enough to know you probably see it all the time. What are you thinking when you're hearing people just wiling out talking to Cam during games?
I mean, like, they're just trying to make him mad. We just got to stay focused, stay on the game. People going to do that, just to get in your head, just, mess up your game, mess up your coach, especially from Cam's point, because he's the one that's calling the plays for us. So he don't let that get to the head. He do it after the game and before the game. So, yes.
So I was going to actually ask about that. Like, he's out there calling the plays. Like, I remember in that Raw game, I think y'all won that game against Raw, didn't you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I remember it was heated, so I couldn't remember exactly how it played out, but I remember they were feeding you the rock in that game. For you, former NFL MVPs calling the plays, and he is featuring you, trying to get you the ball. Like, what does that feel like, realizing that?
Just being that, that one-on-one receiver, he can trust me, know I'm going to make a play for him, going to put the team in a great spot for us to win, score. So, yeah.
Cool. You play at Carrollton, which anybody that's never been to Carrollton, I don't think they understand for multiple levels. I mean, beautiful indoor facility, beautiful weight room. Coach, Joey King's one of the best coaches in high school football. Elite college football talent, future NFL talent across the board. Like, do y'all ever sit around and just be like, man, this is kind of crazy that this is the high school world that we live in?
I actually did it today. Like, it's like I go to college already, Carrollton's like a college, like a mini college, but it's not college, you know. So it's just preparing me, you know, when I go off in December, you know, just being ready, you know.
Other than you, who would you say is the most underrated player at Carrollton right now?
Underrated. Caden Spratling.
Oh,
Caden Spratling.
tell the people about Caden Spratling.
Caden Spratling, he's a dog. You know, he's on the DN, ram, come off the edge, blitz, fast, physical. Yeah, so
All right, I'm gonna write that one down and go watch some film afterwards. I got some homework to do on that one.
Yeah.
I guess I should ask on that front. I said other than you because this is maybe a little bit of a juicy question. You're gonna be like, I don't want to talk about that. 24/7 Sports has you as a 3-star, the number 96 wide receiver in the country. I think number 69 player in Georgia. I won't even give my opinion on it. What do you think when you hear that?
I won't never let rankings, you know, tell me how good I am. You know, I know what I can do and my ability when I go on the field, so I don't let rankings get to my head. I don't even know when the last time I looked at rankings. You know, so I just go on the field and do my thing. You know, show them what I could do. So.
Yeah, we'll don't tell my bosses I'm saying this, but 24/7 has them ranked too low.
Yeah.
Let the people know. All right. So I did. This is. I should have thought to ask this earlier, probably, but I want to play a quick little game, real quick. I played this with Zach Fort. He was committed, obviously, as a safety in Georgia's class. He goes to IMG Academy, and they're recruiting a lot of people at IMG Academy. And so I wanted to ask, we played a game called Dog or Not, where I kind of went through the other IMG players and said, is he going to end up a dog or is he going to go somewhere else? So you're not blowing up anyone's spot. You can not even tell me the truth if you want. We're just going to play the game.
Okay.
I'm going to ask first about the 3 wide receivers because I know you were on the unofficial, or you came on an unofficial during this most recent OV weekend.
Yeah, last weekend.
I'm going to ask you about the receivers and then obviously your high school teammate as well. Sedarian Morgan, dog or not? That's okay. We can leave it at that.
Dog.
The pause is going to make people question that. All right, Brandon Bennett.
Dog.
All right, Craig Dandridge.
Not.
All right, and then this is where your expertise is really going to come into play. Zyke Helton. I know y'all been teammates for a while. Dog or not?
I'm gonna have to go with dog. I'm gonna have to go with dog.
I'll ask you a follow-up on that one. Like, y'all been teammates for a while. I know he's been committed to Bama in the past, and I know they're still recruiting him. He's still got visits there, and he's still taking a look around. When you're talking to him about his decision, like, what do you tell him about Georgia to try and reinforce the Georgia side of things?
Just come be great. You want to go to the league? Come be great. Come out there in Athens, you know, get coach hard. You know, you'll be set for life.
Cool. All right, so I want to finish with this one. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, Facebook, or X, I'm going to be sharing a photo here. But I wanted to get Ryan's take on this photo right here. He dropped it on March 10th. Tell us the backstory here. You're rocking Georgia gear as a young lad. What you doing here?
So back then, when I was like 4 or 5, I used to play, you know, football. So I played with the Bulldogs. So ever since I just love the Bulldogs. So, you know, now I'm actually committed to the Bulldogs, you know, get to play on the next level, you know, college level. So it's crazy, you know, it's a long way. So yeah.
That's a dope photo though. Like that, like I know when you dropped that, you were like, this is sweet. This is sweet.
Oh yeah. When I found I was like, this is crazy. Like I've been a dog since I was young. So
actually, when I post the show, can I say this week's guest and drop this photo?
Yeah, that's fine. That's perfectly fine.
It's fine. It's a fire photo. Yeah. I got to. So knowing that you grew up a Georgia fan or, you know, playing for the Bulldogs, kind of being a Georgia guy, like what does it feel like now kind of getting to sit here and realize like, all right, finally made it happen?
I mean, like my mind still blows. Like I'm really committed to Georgia, you know, like when I was a young bull, like I never knew I was going to play for the University of Georgia for Coach Kirby Smart. Like now that I'm committed and I be able to show my ability, I love that. So
cool. Awesome, Ryan. Well, for starters, congratulations on, you know, finally letting the people know what you've probably known for a while. Appreciate you hopping on with us as well. I'd love to have you back on at some point before you actually get to Georgia, of course. And I'm sure we'll cross paths here 7-on-7 or off-season workouts or something like that here soon. But really appreciate you joining.
Thank you.
All right, Jordan. I've had a lot of interactions with Ryan Mosley through the last year and a half or so. But what do you think about what Georgia's adding at wide receiver there?
Well, one, just from getting to hear from him, I thought that was one of the better interviews we've had on Stay Wolk. I really liked hearing from Ryan. Looking at his game, I really was impressed with his hands. Wrote about him earlier in the week, talking about, how reliable he is and his ability to go attack the ball, even on throws that, aren't picture perfect. I really like that addition for Georgia. And then going back to the interview, I was fascinated by him talking about the potential to play both ways and saying, that he could be playing safety on third downs. Kind of reminded me of back in the day when Malcolm Mitchell played a little bit of cornerback and also playing receiver. And then I'd be fascinated to get sort of a behind-the-scenes look at James Coley, just sort of hearing him describe him and what that's like. I think that James Coley's a guy I'd like to hear from more often, just like in interviews and stuff like that, because I think he's a hell of a recruiter, and I think you can tell when the receivers talk about him. He's somebody that you meet and you get a chance to sit down with, you don't forget about him, and he makes an impression. And I think he's done a very good job of making the most of that by being able to get guys like Ryan Mosley.
No doubt. Yeah, very much appreciate Ryan wanting to come on the show and, share some of his background on why he chose Georgia. And if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to throw some. We realized we didn't actually throw highlights up a couple of weeks ago when he committed. And so if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to have his highlights going over there, but just kind of getting into the type of player that he is. We talked about it in that interview. Like, he's 6'3". I've seen him listed 6'4" some places, anywhere from 208 to 215 pounds. He is going to be great contested catch, right? Like, I've had clips upon clips upon clips at his practices and games where he has just completely manhandled the one-on-one matchup that he was in. And sometimes it's in great coverage where the defensive backs are in phase and it doesn't matter. He's still going to make plays. And when you watch his film, there are always situations where there are guys that are, in good defensive position, and it doesn't matter. Now, that's not to say he can't create separation, because I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, why, if he's always draped with defenders making these catches, he can't get separation. No, that's not the case either. It's just when you excel in a certain area, it allows you don't have to win the rep. Though, if you're watching right there, that dude remembers that rep against Ryan Mosley, because Ryan Mosley had about 10 yards of space on him as he was getting into the end zone. But the things I said this, Ryan, when we were during the interview, like, he is so much better after the catch than I think people realize. And I think everyone gets caught up in his size and his length and his 50-50 ball ability. They forget that this is a dude that could play SEC safety, and that a school like Georgia is recruiting to do that too. So clearly there is a range of motion type of athleticism that you cannot underestimate. And so, yeah, I love this pickup for Georgia. And I think that you all got to see, in that interview, there is a guy with a good head on his shoulders that loves Georgia and just wanted to be at Georgia.
Yeah, I really was impressed by some of his route running. I think that play you brought up a minute ago, he kind of sells like he's going inside and he cuts it back out. And he's just got plenty of space. I think there's a lot to like with this pickup for Georgia. And, I'm always going to be a sucker for in-state guys. I always kind of like seeing those guys from Georgia, but he's a guy that you should be excited about, just period. No matter how you got him or where he's coming from, I think he's got a chance to be a contributor at Georgia and to be a guy that people are aware of for years to come.
I don't know about you, Jordan. If I were him, that picture of me as a kid in the Georgia jersey get up, that would be my profile picture everywhere. Just let the people know I was born to be in this Georgia recruiting class.
And he was wearing 34. I have to think that
I didn't even ask him about that.
That had to have been like, I have to imagine little league coaches coaching a team that are the Bulldogs. Like, that's probably like a knockdown drag out between parents of like, no, my son's got to play 34. Like, you don't just get 34 if that's your team.
See, this is why we need to have a real journalist like you interviewing these guys, because I didn't even think to ask it, and that was great. I'm sure there's a story there.
Yeah, I also appreciate you bringing up Kirby chewing my ass out. That was great too.
You know, I love asking people about the mic just because it's like everyone has. Like I asked him about it because I remember a Georgia signee from a couple of cycles ago telling me a story about how he had his phone out at practice, and Kirby was like, "Oh, you think you're a 5-star, huh? You don't need to pay attention to practice. Like, put your phone away or get out of here." Like, nobody's safe. It doesn't matter if he's recruiting you or not. And so, anytime that I bring up Mike stories, which I'm going to bring up a lot because I love asking people about their Kirby Mike stories, I'm going to bring up the Jordan Hill Mike story because it's a great one. It's vintage Kirby.
Everybody's got to stay on their toes at practice. Literally, nobody is safe.
Oh man, I'm picturing. I feel bad for the people listening to this because I have the image in my head of Kirby Smart creeping up behind your shoulder, looking over your notepad and chirping at you on the mic, and it's just I can only imagine what was going through your head as that was unfolding. You're just like, I'm just trying to do my job, man. I'm just trying to do my job.
It was something. I'll say that.
Yeah. All right. I loved. I'm so glad that I got to witness that. All right. Arrow pointing up. I will go first. I only actually have one this week, and it is UGA golf, which might sound a little weird because they didn't actually make the NCAA championships or the finals this year. But I'll say good year so far for UGA dogs on tour. Sepp Straka, Russell Henley, and Harris English, all three are in the top 10 in the FedEx Cup standings right now. But that's not the reason I'm bringing this up. The arrow is pointing up because of a 16, maybe 17-year-old junior in high school, Mason Howell from Thomasville, Georgia, goes to Brookwood School in Thomasville, Georgia, qualified for the U.S. Open in the Atlanta Regional over the weekend. So for people that aren't super golf nuts like I am, my wife is as well, they call U.S. Open qualifying day golf's longest day. You're playing 36 holes. There are a lot of former pros. There are a lot of rising star amateurs. There are a lot of college athletes that are participating in these U.S. Open qualifiers, trying to finish in the top, 4, 6, whatever, and depending on the regional for the U.S. Open. It is as grueling of a day of golf as you're going to find, and it is as competitive of a day of golf as you're going to find. And so the fact that Mason Howell not only qualified, tied for first in his qualifying event is crazy to me. It was a bogey-free 36 holes for him. He went 18 under. The reason why I'm bringing this up as well, I should have said, he is committed to play college golf at Georgia. He's also a state champion from last year. He was tied for the low medalist with his high school teammate, who also just signed in December to play golf at Georgia as well. So a couple of guys from Brookwood School in Thomasville that are winning state championships, that are qualifying for the U.S. Open in incredible fashion. 18 under is just ridiculous over 2 rounds of golf for anybody, but especially for someone like Mason Howell who can't even vote. So it's crazy to me. Unbelievable accomplishment. He will be participating in Oakmont next weekend at the U.S. Open. There were major champions. I mean, Zach Johnson was in his qualifying event that he's qualifying over the top of. So I think people need to understand just how good youth golfers are nowadays. Like, the game has grown to a point that young golfers can dominate some of these types of events. Nonetheless, still crazy, still shocking, really impressive. Still has another year of high school as well. But yeah, Mason Howell, arrow pointing up on him, arrow pointing up on UGA golf, and just some, good news on that front. Even though, again, I know that the college season itself didn't go ideally according to plan, Georgia's still churning out UGA golfers left and right.
Imagine being that young and the pressure of that moment, and for it to not affect you, and for him to play that well. And just think about too, like if you're a golfer 16, 17, and if you're that good, I mean, like you're basically set for the next 50 years as far as playing golf. And talk about 18 under there, Ben. That had to remind you of our game, right? Like that had to remind you of being out on the links, me and you.
Yeah, what was it, like 18 under 120 or something like that?
Yeah, that's just your typical Thursday over at Chimney Oaks.
That's right. All right, Jordan. I'm going to give a quick shout out while you mentioned that when we're talking golf, and you mentioned the chimneys as well. With the collective, I want to give a shout out to a guy, Patrick Jacobs, that does work over with the collective. Just got a hole-in-one on that downhill par 3 on the front 9. We talked about it when we played, that it is the perfect hole-in-one hole because you get to watch your ball roll in, you get a perfect view of everything. So I did want to give a shout out to him because I saw on Instagram yesterday that he had gotten a hole-in-one. I think he said it was playing. I think it's from his Instagram caption. I think it was like playing 140. It was 147 playing 135 downhill. Nice little 9-iron into the wind. Congratulations. One day, Jordan, maybe it'll be us.
I believe in us. 2 arrows pointing up. Arrow pointing up. Bad baseball teams. Just gonna mention the Braves. Look, I'm done. I'm out. Like, they're not making the playoffs. I've seen enough. Maybe they'll prove me wrong. But I really bring up bad baseball teams. Hey, shout out the Colorado Rockies. Colorado has been taking a ton of crap this year, rightfully so, because they've been really, really bad. They're coming off their first series win of 2025. You had to go back to 2024. And during that series win, first back-to-back wins since May 1st. So Braves are dead in the water. The Rockies are even worse, but let's shout out bad baseball teams. They're grinding through 162 game season. It's not always pretty, but you gotta shout out the achievements along the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'll add this to that as well. I didn't know you were going to bring up the Rockies, but I'm glad you did. Charlie Condon's been having some success in their minor league organization. I don't know if you know this about me, Jordan, but growing up, when my family would go on family vacations, we wouldn't go to like the beach. We would go to MLB parks all around the country, and then we would base our trips around cities and those types of things. The only parks that are out there that I haven't been to now at this point are Coors Field, San Francisco, obviously the new Las Vegas, whatever that's going to be, and then Seattle. I've been to everywhere else. I'm actually, at the end of July, I'm going to go out to Denver and go see a Colorado Rockies game for the first time. Maybe not the best year for the Rockies to be able to go do it, but it's one that I wanted to try and check off my list. I've got a buddy that just moved out just outside of Denver as well, so maybe Charlie Condon will be playing for the Rockies by the time that I'm going out there.
Yeah, on our board on Wednesday, I brought up that he had hit another home run, and somebody was like, he's going to be in the majors before long. And I responded, okay, does that say more about Charlie Condon or does that say more about the Rockies? I think it's kind of 50-50.
Yeah, I think someone said technically.
Last arrow pointing up, Friendship. This is a
yeah.
new movie with Tim Robinson and Paul Rudd. Ben and I went and checked it out on Saturday, and we didn't really do a debrief after it, but I think you liked this as much as I did. To me, that's the most I've laughed in a movie theater in a while. I thought it was hilarious. If you know Tim Robinson, you know what you're getting into. If you're not, there's a lot of awkward comedy. So if you can't deal with like someone just being so super awkward, don't watch this movie. Otherwise, I mean, it was hilarious. I don't know, Ben, what your thoughts were, but it lived up to everything I hoped it would be. I thought it was very funny.
Well, yeah, I'll admit I didn't know a whole lot about it until you were like, yo, let's go see this movie. And, I'm obviously a Paul Rudd guy, Tim Robinson guy, both very funny. It is one of those things, you got to probably recommend it to the right person because I'm sure there's certain people that wouldn't necessarily get it or they would leave especially it's sort of an abrupt ending, I guess I would say, where they might be like, what? I think the girl next to us, when it ended, she said, what the hell? And so I think there are people that would have that reaction probably. That said, it's been a while since I've gone to a theater for a kind of an awkward, weird humor comedy movie. And it makes me realize like how interesting of a dynamic it is. There was a couple moments where I was in tears and I realized scenes were happening where I was laughing and not a whole lot of other people around the theater were in certain situations. It reminds me, and this was back like long time ago, but still, a stupid humor comedy that I think holds is super bad. That you can, if you're watching it with the wrong people are going to be looking at you like, you thought that was funny. You're sick in the head for thinking that was funny. But yeah, I mean, there were multiple times where I was having to stop myself from trying not to be as laughing as audibly as I was, especially knowing that I think there were people like the girl next to us that were like, what in the world is going on in this movie?
Yeah, it was a situation where I had to really be cognizant of how much soda I had left, and like the popcorn I was eating. I was like, I'm gonna get choked laughing at this. So, but that was a great experience. I thought it was a great movie.
Yeah, so someone will listen to this, go and see it, and leave the theater being like, "What? What was this?" I will say it is one of those movies where you kind of leave and you're like, "So what exactly was going on the whole time?" Like I don't totally, whatever. But that's the charm of it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just think if you haven't already subscribed to Dogs 24/7, you can get a deal, and then you can get these movie reviews. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, there's more to offer than just football recruiting and team coverage.
Should we start doing a Paramount Plus? And I mean, not right now because we've got too much to talk about, but that's a good idea. You're more of like the right movies guy for things that are a little bit different. This is something we should definitely talk about offline. The possibility maybe we do Paramount Plus movie reviews where we watch movies that I haven't seen and then talk about them. I kind of like this, but
I think that's a great idea.
We'll table that one and we'll figure that one out as well. All right. A new segment that we're going to be doing probably just for the most part during this window of time. And it is Around the Country, which we're open to name changes if someone listening to this has a better idea of what it should be named. But I just think this time of year, guys are going to be committing to programs other than Georgia that I personally think should be relevant to you. And so I'm going to share with you guys that I think should be relevant for one reason or another. More often than not, it is someone that I think Georgia thinks is a good player or someone that I think is going to a recruiting rival that I find interesting. So we'll get into that. It'll just be probably a few every single week. But as the summer goes on, there will be guys that commit to places other than Georgia, and we'll talk about them a little bit. I'll start with Mark Bowman to USC, tight end. Somewhat surprising announcement for him to close things down right before he starts taking those official visits. I also think surprising in that, well, depending on how you look at it, surprising that it was USC. I think if you're just looking at the recruitment at face value and the way that he talked about things and the way that it was perceived behind the scenes, Georgia and Texas were feeling pretty good about things. That said, USC is the number one recruiting class in the country right now. I think that USC has some you're going to I'll just say it. I've seen the reporting out there, $8 to $10 million over 3 years for Mark Bowman. I think one thing that I probably haven't done a good enough job, and I don't think anybody probably has, is like there is a difference when you're seeing these numbers between between guaranteed and what potential earnings are. And I think the potential earnings, one, that's performance based, but two, it's when we're talking about the over the cap NIL deals and what's going to be possible. I don't think that everything that is being created is going to be a guaranteed, this is how it's going to work out. But what I will say is I think that USC does have some built-in advantages when it comes to being in LA, commercials, TV, film, just other Hollywood stars, brands being out there. The USC probably does have some leverage and pull when it comes to above the cap NIL stuff that a lot of other schools don't. And so I think that that's playing a role here, but I also think that when you hear 8 to 10 million, some of that that's not just 8 to 10 million from the revenue share cap that USC is going to be doing. That's what the potential earnings could be for Mark Bowman based on the revenue share plus the above the cap NIL opportunities that they think are going to be available to him. Big win for USC, hurts Georgia, but I think that it just magnified the Caden Prothrow recruitment a little bit.
I'm going to zag and say, wow, USC was so reckless and they just dropped a bag, man.
Yeah. Well, hey, people have that opinion too, but if you think in the revenue share era, you can just drop a bag and then that's that. You're just not living in what I believe is the real world where you just have unlimited spending. That's just not how it works. You got to be smart with who you give it to. And I'll say this, Georgia was going to be aggressive with Mark Bowman. 8 to 10 million. No, that's not a world that Georgia's going to be living in for high school incoming freshmen, especially ones that reclassified from the 2027 recruiting class. That said, Georgia wanted this dude. Probably him and Jackson Cantwell. We'll see what happens, I guess, with like Tyler Atkinson, but these will go down as the biggest, disappointments within Butts-Mehre Athletic Building from this recruiting cycle. A couple of guys that ended up at Florida, Niver Carr, IMG Academy interior offensive lineman. We'll see if he takes official visits. What I've started to see is, and I don't know if this is new age or the ironclad nature of these contracts allows it to be this way, that a lot of these guys committing now and are not taking visits after they've committed. Ryan Mosley's not taking visits. Mark Bowman's not taking visits. Jackson Cantwell, Jared Curtis, they're not taking visits. So it is interesting. I think in many cases, guys that are committing this time of year are not going to take the rest of their official visits. We'll see if that plays out with a guy like Niver Carr or safety Caden Hall, who I don't think was expecting to take an official visit to Georgia, but someone Georgia had recruited at one point and a win for Florida on the recruiting trail that I think people should pay attention to. And then this is one that I'm just bringing up because it's a sick name. Yaya God from Tennessee, I believe, is going to UCLA. Defensive lineman, not a whole lot for me to add there because Georgia wasn't, I think he camped at Georgia at times throughout the process or whatever. But you're going to see, best names in college football lists over the next few years, and Yaya God is going to be on those lists. Now, I will say it is spelled Yahya, and then God is spelled Gaad. But either way, it's a name that's going to be making best names lists for years to come.
I really hope he winds up being good, and I hope UCLA leans into the thing Auburn basketball did this past season with Call God. Like just let's get this guy going. Let's make this guy a big time player. I'm glad he got a mention on the show.
Yeah, that's right. And hey, he'll be out in LA too. I'm sure that there will be some marketing opportunities for him out there as well. I know that's a segment around the country that I think Georgia fans are going to hope is a shorter segment moving forward, because when we're bringing up names during that segment, it means bad news happened on the Georgia recruiting front, or someone just had an awesome name. One of the two basically is what's going to happen. All right. The segment we are all waiting for all episode long, every episode long, is Predict a Commit. We're going to do a quick refresher on our two teams. We have had some wins for us since the last episode, so shout out to us. I'll start with your team. You have 3 wins already. Jared Curtis, Carter Luckie, and Jordan Smith. You did suffer a new miss this week in Mark Bowman to go along with Jared Smith from before, but you've got some great opportunities still out there on your team. Derek Cooper, Tyler Atkinson, Kamari Brooks, PJ Dean, Craig Dandridge, James Johnson, Caden Prothro, Desmond Green, Isaiah Williams, and Tico Crittenton. Is that everybody on your team? You took Crittenton last week, right?
That's correct.
So, I'll say on your list, I'll just, for the people, Kamari Brooks, I think I'm feeling good. Craig Dandridge, Caden Prothro, Desmond Green. You've got some wins coming up in your future. I'll say that. On my team, I've got 4 wins at this point. That is Graham Houston, Zach Fort, Ryan Mosley, and most recently, Justice Fitzpatrick. My only loss at this point so far is Jackson Cantwell, which is going to stay a loss. That's not changing. The rest of my team, Jay Lamar, Malcolm Gaston, Tyreek Green, Ekene Agboko, Brett Collegier, Ernest Rankins, Peyton Dyer, Whitley Cadeau, Alabama commit Chris Booker, and Zyke Helton. I'll say it, Jordan. I like your team better than mine right now. I think we both have some wins, but I can also look at my list and point to, I don't want to say 3, maybe 3 losses that I can point to right now that I don't feel good about at this point in time. We'll see what happens moving forward. But that said, for us to have 7 right now, I think is indicative of the work that we've put in on our Predict to Commit teams in the offseason. I'm going to start. Oh, sorry.
Wait, just going to say, we know ball. I don't care what anybody else says. If no one else believes it, I know that we know ball.
That's right. No matter what Dogs 24/7 commenters are saying about us. All right, this week we're just doing Predict to Commit. As we did with last week, it's just going to be from the list of people who are taking official visits this upcoming weekend that we have not already selected. In many cases, there are a few that are already on our teams. I'm actually going to start here, and I think there's some good choices here. And quite frankly, there's probably going to be guys that go unselected from this weekend that end up in Georgia's class. I'm not ruling that out. But I'm going to go first, and I'm going to take someone that I think might surprise some people, but a guy that I would have in a mock class if I was doing a mock class right now. I'm not going to until the end of official visits. But that is North Shore, Houston defensive back Chase Calicut. Chase Calicut, spelled with a C, by the way, Chace. Awesome name. Just a name I can picture Chase Calicut, pick 6, running along the bottom line on ESPN. I can picture that. 6'3", 190 pounds. Georgia loves the frame. definitely someone that I think Georgia is pushing for. And like I've said, when Georgia is pushing for guys this cycle at defensive back, they've had a lot of success. You're seeing the picture right there, him throwing the horns up with Sarkisian. That's probably number one fear for Georgia right now. Does Texas find a way to hold him down? But I know that other out-of-state schools like Michigan have had some buzz at points this spring too. So a little bit of a leap of faith, a little bit of a bold selection. But now that Justice Fitzpatrick's in the boat, I'm trying to say, all right, where are we moving next at defensive back? And Chase Callicut's my choice.
Yeah, I really like that one. I think you hit on the biggest thing is just, if they're going to be able to convince him to leave Texas. I mean, I think about North Shore. If I'm remembering right, North Shore is like a powerhouse, right, in Houston. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, that getting him out of Texas, and I've seen there are some crystal balls for the Longhorns, but I like that pick. If Georgia lands him, I mean, that just adds to what I already think is a fantastic secondary class.
Completely agree. All right, who you got this week, Jordan?
All right, I've kind of gone back and forth on this one because there's a few guys that really interest me as we look at the different options, and I'm going to pull up our screen here while I'm trying to make my choice. And I'm going to go on the defensive line, and I'm going to go with Vodney Cleveland, defensive lineman, 6'3", 305 out of Birmingham, Parker High School. We hit on it earlier in this episode. It's so hard to pull guys out of the state of Alabama, but I'll be honest, Ben, I'm going to give you a hat tip. When you were sort of previewing this set of visitors earlier in this episode, and you talked about how Georgia is, they kind of like to play defensive line close to the vest, and you don't always know who they like and who they're targeting. That kind of got me thinking I should look at one of these defensive linemen. So I went with Vodney Cleveland. I think he's a guy that checks a lot of boxes for Georgia, and he's a guy I'm watching out of the people visiting this weekend. He's going to be my pick.
I love that pick. And, someone on our board, I can't remember what it was a Q&A a couple weeks ago. They were asking our, nose tackle. What do we have Vodney listed at there? I'm
6'3", 305 is what he is listed at
so
on his
maybe not
profile.
The full nose. People have been trying to figure out who do you think is going to be the nose in Georgia's class? Trying to figure out that zero tag anchor type. And Georgia's usually looking for 6'4", 330. Not saying that he couldn't get there, but I was sitting there trying to think could that be a guy that I haven't been thinking about as much in that role? But yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, Georgia went to go see him multiple times this spring. You look at the official visitors, it's going to be a competitive one. That's why he was in my most competitive category. But I do like the pick. I will say that.
I'll say that as we're scrolling through the photos here where the folks on YouTube can watch another photo of a prospect with throwing horns up with Steve Sarkisian. So that's doesn't exactly make you feel great if you're Georgia, and a whole lot of Auburn photos on there as well. Like we said, pulling guys out of the state of Alabama is much easier said than done, but we're going to see what happens. I think it's going to get really interesting when it comes to defensive line in this class.
Yeah, absolutely. And, now that I look at my team, I've kind of shot. I have two defensive linemen, but one of them I don't feel great about right now. So we'll see. I probably need to make a move on the defensive line. Defensive line and linebacker is lacking for me right now on my predicted commit team. You sort of handcuffed me with picking Tyler Atkinson as early as you did, because then I think we got to figure things out beyond that. And then on the defensive line, like I said, it's always so hard because Georgia's tricky. Georgia likes to be very, very sneaky on the defensive line. And that's why Georgia defensive line recruiting is so good all the time, because they have evals that they don't want people to know about. And they don't want people to know that they're recruiting some people as hard as they are. I think that's smart. All right. Another great show. Thank you to everyone who listened. Jordan, thank you to you as always. Yeah.
Wanted to shout out. I meant to do this in the arrow pointing up because the last Stay Wolk, I was getting ready to go to dinner, seafood dinner down in Destin. Shout out the crab trap in Destin.
Okay.
I had deviled crab, which I had never heard of or tried. And I've been thinking about the deviled crab ever since I had it. It was so good. So the crab trap down in Destin, I felt like I meant to do that in the arrow pointing up, and then it hit me. So I couldn't let this episode end without throwing that.
Yeah, no, I love arrow pointing up out of segment anyway. All right, I got to ask though. I'm someone else to talk about people yelling in their car. I couldn't even pick deviled crab out of a lineup. What are we even looking at here?
I mean, I don't really know how else to explain it, but like it's like a piece of crab, and then you sort of get into it, and it's got different, I guess, like herbs in it. I mean, and like I think there's some mayo in there. I got it as part of like a platter, so it came with fish and fries and stuff. But like just the texture alone, but also the taste, it was so good. And when I finished it, I was like, man, this is gonna be something I seek out. If I'm in that area, or just if I get seafood, if there's deviled crab out there.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to go eat right after this now. So thanks to Jordan, I guess, for everything, for being here, and for the culinary opinions. Thanks to Ryan Mosley for joining us as well. Really enjoyed that conversation. As always, check out Dogs 24/7. It's a great opportunity to do it. I really do think it's the best time to be able to get in, because you're getting so much right away from a recruiting standpoint, and then it dives straight into SEC media days in the football season, and it's really all systems go from here on out. So do that. You subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We got a 60% promo running, I believe, through June 11th. Is that right, Jordan?
I think it's either June 10th or June 11th. Don't wait that long.
Don't wait until then. Don't wait until then. Don't run the risk that it's June 9th. Like and subscribe this if you're watching this on YouTube. We do appreciate our YouTube audience, which we are trying to, boost up. But thank you to the Apple Podcast and Spotify audiences, which have always been fantastic in number. Leave a review if you're so inclined. Tell us in the comments that Jordan has great culinary takes, whatever it might be. Just whatever you do, please give us 5 stars. We will be back next week to review this upcoming weekend's official visit slate, to talk about the official visit weekend that's coming up after that. There's a potential for some interesting guests that we might be able to have on for next week's show as well. So we will see. Jordan, any final thoughts before we call it a day?
No, I think another fun episode. And like we talked about from the top, I mean, I'm a little biased, but I think this is a great time to listen to these recruiting centric podcasts, because there's so much to get into. And again, stuff changes so quickly, but no, a fun one, and looking forward sincerely to do it again next week and see what all we've learned.
All right. That's enough back patting for one episode. I'm your host, Benjamin Wolk, for Jordan Hill. It was another great episode of Stay Wolk UGA Recruiting Show.